Well, hello, Ronald.
Hello, Canton Lee Parker.
Not a lot of people know that's my full name, actually, Canton Lee. They just know me as Canton.
You dropped the Lee part.
You're one of the lucky few to know that my name is Canton Lee.
You dropped the Lee part.
I just felt like
You're lucky it wasn't Bruce Lee.
Well, isn't that where you got the Lee from?
Not really.
So where did you get the Lee from?
I don't know. The Canton I got out of China. The Lee I also got out of China.
So my name, Canton Lee, is just because it sounded nice, and you were like, "Oh, that's great. Let's do that."
Canton comes out of the Canton Fair in China, and Canton Road in Hong Kong, and the Lee bit is a very common Chinese surname.
Okay, I'm gonna say I believe you.
I'll prove it.
But
I think I gave you the pictures.
You might have actually.
Yeah,
I think you have. Yes,
absolutely.
Yes. So welcome to the Canton Parker podcast. This is something super new, super fresh. My expectation in doing this podcast is that it needs to be real, raw, to the point. It's not going to involve a lot of editing. I just wanted to have genuine conversation, authentic conversation, real conversation, sometimes deep, sometimes funny, the 3 E's that forever tell people: educational, entertaining, or empowering. If this podcast can aim at that, then I think I'll be in a pretty good space. And I could think of no one else but to join me for the very start of the Canton Parker podcast than Daddy Dearest himself, the Ronald Theodore Parker, the man, the myth, the legend, the one that keeps on forgetting his Apple ID password for the life of me. Why he doesn't write it down, I will never know. But welcome.
When we finish, give it to me and I'll write it down.
But welcome. Thank you for joining me, and thank you for being willing to open up your home, allowing me to invade it with all my gear and just infiltrate it with Rode microphones because they're just fantastic and the quality is superb. But yeah, welcome and hello.
Thank you.
So we've had conversation before about a lot of things, and I think this is such a cool opportunity to jump in and discuss a few things about stuff. And one of those things which I think is pretty cool is that you have gotten a front row seat in watching me live life, watching me experience life, the ups, the downs, the happies, the sads, the uglies, the whatever. When you look back at my life and kind of, I'm now 30, you're 74, when you kind of have had that front row seat of watching me grow up and watching me experience life, has there ever been a moment where you thought to yourself, what on earth am I doing? And what on earth is this kid doing?
Many times. Many times.
Was there any one memorable part, or even if you want to mention a couple, that you felt you always go back to and you think about? I mean, I've got a few. You're laughing like, yo, which one do we pick on? Like from being in high school to dropping out of high school to throwing up in the back of your car.
That was a memorable one.
When I was in high school, which was funny, and not for you, but for me at least, being thrown in a cold shower. But yeah, has there ever been...
Well, it wasn't too funny for you because you had to clean the car at 1 o'clock in the morning.
That is true.
And have a cold shower when you got home.
That was while I was still feeling my feels and stuff.
Well, that's true.
Underage drinking, I do not recommend it to anybody.
Especially if you're the son of Ronald D. Parker.
Very true. It's practically like going to the army. And speaking of the army, you weren't in the army, but you were in the police force.
That's it.
So before we touch on that, because that's a big one, going back to having few memorable moments in life, is there anyone about me that you can straight off the bat just remember?
Well, you mentioned drinking.
Yeah.
And getting sick in the back of my car. You having to walk home from school one day, an odd 9 kilometers. Having to sit outside in my car until 9 o'clock at night while you were at Vega. Having to sit in my car on Saturday mornings while you were at Vega. doing what you do today or studying to do what you do today.
Which is interesting because I never finished. Like high school
Well,
or
after
studies.
you had left school, you did online schooling for a while, which you didn't finish either.
I'm just the man of incomplete quests.
Then, I think a bit different today.
I like that. That's
So
cool.
that's a plus for you.
That is. I think my background in having you as a dad and having the upbringing that I had with the siblings that I had and the environment and the climate of my upbringing definitely has shaped and molded me into the person I am today. And a lot of that had to do with your mindset and upbringing and flair and flavor, if I could call it that. And all to your credit, you raised the legend, Ronald, I must say. No.
You're speaking about yourself.
But you were in the police force.
That's it.
That sounds like quite a journey back then. Now I can't speak now. I feel like there's a lot we could say about the police force, which we will leave for another episode.
Let me interject. They were good days.
They were good days. And now...
They were good days. In uniform, on the border. I needed to get out of uniform. So my drive or ambition was to get out of uniform and get into the CID, which I did.
What is the CID specifically?
It's being a detective. It's a criminal investigation department.
So you were the original Inspector Clouseau.
If you want to call that. So, and I must also say that I didn't just join the police force to be in the police force. I studied, I wrote exams, I passed those exams, and I went through the ranks and attained a reasonable rank in the police force. But that wasn't going to be my start and my finish. So I eventually got out of the police force and went into the commercial world, doing what I'm doing today.
And what is that today? Because you've had quite the journey.
Well, after I left the police force, I joined Johnson & Johnson, starting at the bottom, packing shelves. And again, I had a very good mentor in Johnson & Johnson and worked through the ranks, starting off from having attained a commissioned rank in the police force to packing shelves once I left the police force. So that was from giving instructions to taking instructions and packing shelves. But again, I worked through the ranks and got to a fairly senior position within Johnson & Johnson. And the last one, I was transferred many times. And the last one was to East London. And I couldn't live in East London. I needed to get out of East London. So I left the police force. I left Johnson & Johnson and came back to Johannesburg from East London. And that was where I joined a toy company, Lego. And that was many, many years ago, after having been in the police force for many, many years.
I remember growing up having a massive, trunk of just Lego. And that's...
Don't say that too loud.
And I remember, sitting in, we had, that makeshift garage thing, and I would, build, circuits and castles and what. So, yeah, it was awesome having a dad that was in the toy industry as a kid, that you got to have, in a sense, the first pick at the newest toys. And Lego, I mean, now Lego's massive. Lego are in even video games at the moment and doing collaborations with so many different brands. And Lego now, as influential and as big as it is, back then, do you feel like it's carried through, or was Lego not as big back then?
No, it wasn't anywhere near what it is today. And Lego was in its infancy in this country when I joined Lego. And I was fortunate enough to have been interviewed by the president of Lego at the time and got the appointment within Lego to take care of their sales and marketing, which again stemmed from our background in Johnson & Johnson. So that was a tremendous experience. And it also exposed me to international travel with the Lego company. And that lasted a good couple of years before they disinvested in this country because of sanctions. So that was the start of getting involved in the toy industry, which, needless to say, went on for many, many years.
Yeah, I remember.
For many years. And once Lego disinvested, I was headhunted by a company, Jossie Feldman, who was Jossie Feldman, the man himself.
Oh, was that actually a guy's name?
Yeah.
I always thought it was just the name of the company.
No.
So his name was Jossie
His
Feldman.
name was Jossie Feldman.
Wow.
And the company was Jossie Feldman Pty Limited. And within Jossie Feldman Pty Limited, there was Fisher-Price, there was, at the time, Masters of the Universe, there was Crayola, there was FX Humbrol.
Big brands.
There were big brands within that company. And as with Lego, where I really had a free hand, I was given a free hand within Jossie Feldman. And just so by the way, without getting into too much detail, but Jossie Feldman at the time was importing Lego, and we were doing Lego. How and where is irrelevant. And it was not freely available, but the Lego brand continued, even though the company wasn't here. Whether Lego Denmark were aware of it or not, well, I don't know.
But we got Lego in the country.
We had the product, and we supplied the product.
Now, the toy industry still to this day is massive. But one thing I've always thought about, and I guess it's kind of a little bit of my framework and my starting block, if I could call it that. The toy industry and toys to a child is like wonder in front of them. You know, you've got a dragon, you've got a car, you've got a this, you've got a soldier, you know, in context of like girls, you've got Barbie dolls, you've got whatever. And you've kind of painting this story in your head with these toys in your hand, and you in this world of wonder and amazement, and you do this and you do that. And that's like every kid. Like you look at a kid playing and you must be wondering like what is going through their head. That's like given with every kid that plays with toys. When you move over into adolescence and then when you get into adulthood, those toys change a bit. And for me, at least, that became games and gaming. And you also, if I'm not mistaken, were involved in quite a big pivotal point in gaming in South Africa. I've told many people before, and I always say, I can never prove it, but like, just trust me, this is what I was told. But you were involved with Nintendo South Africa once upon a time.
So let me rewind a bit. The toy industry is still big, but those hands-on toys, that particular market is shrinking a bit because of electronics. And if I look back, the start of electronic toys in this country really was, I think, Nintendo. I'm talking about a branded product. And, within the toy trade, we visited many, many toy fairs in Nuremberg, in London, in Hong Kong, in New York. And while with Lego, it also exposed me to a lot of international travel in the toy industry. So there were many toy fairs and many countries or many toy companies that were visited through this travel. And it was during a visit to the Nuremberg Toy Fair where Nintendo happened to be on display at the Nuremberg Toy Fair. And through Jossie Feldman Pty Limited, we visited that toy fair. And the negotiations were left to me. We got Nintendo, and we launched Nintendo in this country. It It was an absolutely magnificent launch.
I can imagine.
I would say probably one of the best launches that we've ever done. There was a podium, a revolving podium, which really was on loan from a motor dealership on which a motor car was displayed and went round in a circle. We had mounted aeroplane seats on it. You walked into a semi-lit room. It went dark. This revolved into total darkness, so you were completely disorientated. And then the lights remained off, but the screens came on, and there appeared Nintendo. And that presentation probably lasted 30, 45 minutes. It was absolutely stunning. I think I might even still have a videotape of that launch somewhere, a VHS tape.
I'd love to see that.
And the presentation itself was magnificent. The launch was absolutely brilliant. And Nintendo was listed in every single retailer. Excuse me. But having said that, there were similar games, knockoffs out of China, where our consoles at the time were about 800 Rand, roughly, or 1,200 Rand. The game was about 800 Rand. That was for the console. The Chinese console was about 129 Rand, and the games were about 29 Rand. So
those values now, it's
there
like,
was,
what?
You couldn't even get a packet of sweets for that price today. Excuse me. So the launch was good. The product presentation to the trade was well accepted. Nintendo was listed everywhere, and it was good. It was brilliant. But we needed to take some legal action because of these cheap Chinese knockoffs that were coming in. You know, if I look at the game Mario or Mario Brothers, that was one of the leading games at the time. And the Chinese had knocked it off. So, of course, we took legal action. That didn't go down well with the trade. And we ended up having to uplift most of our sell into the trade. So that product came back. And we had to pass credit. That didn't go down too well. We were helped because, you know, at the time we were working through Germany, a fellow by the name of Hans Staller, who was running the Nintendo operation in Southern Africa and Europe, they took those products back. So while we took back, we didn't suffer any financial losses. So the company itself was fine and continued for many, many years after that. Josie Feldman was eventually taken over, got involved with Trigger Toys. Trigger Toys amalgamated the two companies, which became Just Fun. Just Fun was eventually taken over by Prima Toys. The circle went round and round and round, much as today, with takeovers and buyouts and sellouts, if you want to look at it. But it was good. It went down well.
Do you feel like gaming, well, let me say, do you feel like Nintendo then, being a gaming platform, entering the country, you know, you've got PlayStation, you've got Xbox, you know, PlayStation launched in 1994 with PlayStation 1, and gaming now is like, it's exploded. Like gaming, I think if I'm not mistaken, the gaming industry makes more or is bigger. I don't know which one is which, but let's just say it's bigger. Gaming industry is bigger than the movie and music industry combined, which is crazy to think. And do you feel like Nintendo at that time entered the market in such a way that it was the right time for that?
I think it was probably a bit premature.
Okay.
And Nintendo at the time was well ahead of its time. And yes, when I said that the toy market is shrinking, the physical toy that you play with, and that's because of electronic toys, of which, as you just mentioned, Nintendo, PlayStation, Xbox, they really have taken over. And that thing called a mobile phone, you can virtually do anything on it.
That's very true.
So there's a lot of gaming on that device. that has taken over that role play that actual toys fulfilled. I know kids as young as 6 years old today are on mobile phones playing games. In those days, unheard of.
I remember growing up and begging for, I think it was a Nokia or whatever. Like, oh, Dad, can I have a phone? Dad, can I have a phone? And it was always like, you're too young, you're too young. I think I got my first phone, I think I was like 9, 10. And at the time, I thought like, like I'm one of the youngest to like get a phone. Like I remember going to school, so I got a phone, and they're like, what, how'd you get a phone, blah, blah, blah. And now it's like, I see like 4-year-olds with phones.
Absolutely.
And they've got their iPads, and it's almost like that's the modern day pacifier. Like, oh, your kid's making a noise. Oh, here's YouTube, or here's a game, or here's a, whatever. But this thing is both such a blessing and such a curse, to such a degree where, even to kind of take a little bit of a detour, but like depression is at its all-time highest. Anxiety is at its all-time highest. Suicide is at its all-time highest. Prescribed medication is at its all-time highest. And I kind of, in my opinion, think that this thing is the number one culprit, because yes, as much as technology has taken us into the future and connected us like never before, it's also distanced, that's a weird word, but disconnected us like ever before, because we can readily contact someone. But like I'm a culprit of this. I hate answering my phone. Like, you know that.
Absolutely.
I will answer your calls next time, Dad. But like phone calls, like no one wants to do phone calls anymore. Where back in the day you had those phones, it was like shh, 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 and it took you like 500 years just to dial someone's number. And it was a joy to call your friend or call whoever and still be connected, where now you can get a glimpse into people's lives, their holidays, their likes, their dislikes. You can get a glimpse into what their interests are, to the extent of even advertising. I mean, companies now can narrow down if you're interested, if it's in your shopping cart, if you're on the verge of purchase, and they can just feed it to you. And like, that's awesome, but very, very detrimental and dangerous at the same time. And now you being 74, kind of looking back at how technology was, what it is, and kind of having a little bit of a trajectory of what it could be. What does that maybe look or feel like?
Well, firstly, there's nothing wrong with the device.
True.
And there's nothing wrong with technology. I think the problem lies with social media, Facebook, X, or Twitter, or whatever you want to call it.
I'm very surprised that you said X. Like, and hey, look at you.
You're actually allowing that to control you, rather than you controlling it. You have a choice, and that's to leave that platform or to get totally submerged in it, and then it will control you. You can be selective in what you want to do on it. And all of what you mentioned, suicides and depression and whatever else it was, sure, if you're going to allow that to control you rather than you control it, well, those things can happen, and they do happen. It's evident in society. So the choice is yours.
And now, speaking of choice, and I'll probably use myself as an example. Growing up, I had a lot of choices. Do I do this? Do I do that? Do I entertain this? Do I entertain that? Do I go here? Do I go there? And a lot of my choices had to do with my surroundings and my upbringing and how I was raised. And you, as being my father, you've seen literally, as I mentioned, a front row seat in my whole progression. And when I look back, there's a lot of things I probably would have done different. I mean, yesterday I would have probably have done stuff different. And I think the older you get, the more you realize that what you see in front of you isn't all it. For example, I think when you're growing up, you kind of look at it and you're like, this is a square. It's a square, it's a square, it's a square. I know it's a square. No one can tell me any different. This is a square. We're someone in your category now where you've experienced life to the fullest to such a degree where you've kind of seen the ups and the downs and the patterns where, things are going to go down, but things always go back up. And hey, things go up, but things always come back down. And you've kind of found and experienced the rhythms of life and the patterns of life, where someone like me, now I'm starting to learn it. But you remember when you're younger, everyone's like, I'm not going to listen to dad. And then when it's too late, it's, I should have listened to dad more, kind of thing. And now, looking back at all of that, I've always said, and you've heard me say this before, you didn't raise me. You lived and I watched. And that for me has helped me, in a sense, find my own individualism, if I could call it that, but also at the guidance of my father saying like, hey, look at it this way and look at it that way. And with all that to say, now at your age, when you look back, do you feel like there has been one or maybe a few avenues where it could have been different that today would have therefore as a result been different, whether it be tech, whether it be things in culture? There's so many things that I would mention, but I don't want to narrow it down to maybe what you're already thinking.
It could always have been different. The choice could always have been different. You know, at the time, what you do, and you can't undo. So make the best of it. Or what was a mistake, don't make the same mistake. Always improve, always do better. Always strive to be better. And make sure that you are fully you and that you live it out to its full extent.
So would you say that authenticity is that one secret ingredient to living life to the fullest and making the most memories and moments that you possibly could, all through just being yourself?
Authenticity, honesty, integrity.
But now,
and we all sometimes miss that step in the ladder.
And I'm so glad you mentioned
Nothing wrong with that.
In that missing of steps.
Just don't keep missing the steps.
In that missing of steps in the ladder. Like, I'm so glad you used the analogy of a ladder, because the ladder is these two vertical beams corresponding a whole bunch of horizontal beams, and you kind of go up it to get to a elevated viewpoint, whatever, the purpose of a ladder, but kind of spinning it in a bit more of a metaphorical sense where you're climbing the ladder and sometimes you miss a step. Do you feel like in the pursuit of being authentic, some people think they are hitting the right steps where really they're just missing it completely? And only when it's too late, they realize I actually was on the wrong ladder.
That's probably the narcissist.
The narcissist.
Who believes that everything they're doing is right, that they are always right. It's not like that. Learn. The day you stop learning and listening, that's the day you're going to miss one of those steps. So better to learn and listen and not miss a step than to fall off that ladder completely.
And if I could ask, do you feel like you've ever missed a step?
Absolutely.
You took no hesitation in answering that.
He who says he's not missed a step is lying.
Sure.
So we all do. You do.
Yeah.
I have. I do. And I will.
And I guess that's life.
That's life.
It's a book.
Stand up to it. It's a book. But you know, life is more than a book. There are chapters in that book. Those chapters consist of pages. On every page is a sentence, is a paragraph. And take one at a time, starting with a sentence and working your way through the paragraphs, the pages, until you get cover to cover. And that's where life ends. First cover is the start, and the last cover is the close. And there'll be mistakes in between.
And do you feel like now, looking back at your pages, there's anything you would have done different?
Of course.
And now looking at a quote-unquote book in front of you, because I'm a book of your book, if you want to poetically put it. When you look at me now at the ripe old age of 30, do you feel like there is 30-year-old wisdom you would impart, but at the same time, 24 years ago, you were 50? What would be the sentence on the page, or the paragraph on the page, or the chapter, or the whatever, when I'm a 50-year-old, that you would come running at me, grabbing me and going, hey, ho up?
So firstly, those mistakes you refer to, a mistake isn't a mistake. Because if you don't make a mistake, you're not going to learn. Acknowledging and taking ownership of that mistake, you won't make it again. And those mistakes is what builds your character, is what builds you, is what makes you become fully you. And would I have done things differently? Absolutely. Do I regret what I've done? Absolutely. I'd probably do the same things again, because that made me who and what I am today. Regrets? Sure. Would I do it again? Probably. Because you're not perfect, and nor am I. And nor is anyone else on this place called planet Earth.
And I think that's...
What you make of it and what you do with it depends on you.
You're starting to sound like a Lion King script. But it's really good, though. Like, really, really good.
As long as you don't refer to me as Mufasa.
Hey, well, I like to refer to you as Pumbaa. But now, when you look at me in the context of gaming, and you've seen everything that I've been doing, I hope you've been seeing everything I've been doing, but you see, the brands that I'm working with, because I've grown up as a gamer. I've grown up loving gaming, being immersed in gaming. Kind of, remember I used to get all those collector's editions. I started working at a very young age, so I started making money, and then that money, I was like, I don't need to save this for nobody. I want that collector's edition. And you would see this gaming library of mine like explode. When now I'm in a position where I get to work with those brands and those publishers and those distributors and some of those developers, where I get a front row seat in the games that are coming out, and the storytelling and the narrative and the graphics and the gameplay and the whole development bubble that it comes with. When you look back at how I was as a gamer, do you remember any key moments where you felt like, what the hell is this kid doing? Like, I've got a great example. Grand Theft Auto 4, which you will not remember, but this game came out, and I would hope you would remember. I got a PlayStation 1 whenever I got a PlayStation 1. I got a PlayStation 2 when it came out, and I still remember my brothers came and they connected it in my bedroom and everything. It was great, and you took me to Hi-Fi Corp, and that was fantastic. PlayStation 3 came out, and it hadn't come out in the country yet, but because you were in the toy industry and because you traveled and everything, you were in Hong Kong for, funny enough, I think the Canton Toy Fair, actually. And I'll never forget, back when like you did an international phone call and you paid like a kidney and a half a liver just to speak to someone on the other side of the planet, and both people got charged regardless of whoever called. And I'll never forget, you called and you said, there's not a lot of time because this phone call is going to be expensive, but what is this new thing called the PlayStation 3? And I'll never forget, I said to you, what do you mean? And you said, I'm staring at this PlayStation 3. Do you want it? And I was like, do not even play games with me. This is before the PlayStation 3 even came out in South Africa. And I remember you got me a PlayStation 3. You came home from your Hong Kong trip. We plugged it in. The plugs were international plugs, so we had to get adapters. I'll never forget, I turned it on for the first time and the whole thing was in Chinese, because obviously it was born in Hong Kong. But thankfully we had a Chinese neighbor, like kind of, that big white house that was there. I don't know if you remember.
Mrs. Lee.
Yeah, Mrs. Lee. Well, thank you, Mrs. Lee, for having a child that could read Chinese. So long story short,
that's where the Canton Lee came from.
I would presume so. But I'll never forget that I had to call this friend over and he had to read everything on the PlayStation 3 to change it to English. And then eventually we got it in English. And then the funniest part about all of this, and I'm going to get back to this Grand Theft Auto 4 game, it was when region codes were still separated. So you had NTSC and you had PAL. I don't know if you remember that. And PAL was South Africa, but NTSC was more like your northern regions, like North America and your Asian countries. And I'll never forget, I couldn't play South African PlayStation 3 games when the PlayStation 3 eventually released here because the region code was incorrect. So I could only get my games in like America or in Hong Kong. And you were frequently-ish in Hong Kong. And I'd always say, Dad, this was before like internet popped off. So I couldn't see what games were available and what games were coming out. So I would always see like, okay, I think this is coming out. I think. And before I even knew release dates, I'd like write down all these game titles and I'd give them to you. I'd be like, if you find these games, please buy them. Like I didn't have any concept of money at the time. I was like, just when games are free, just get them if you get them. And Grand Theft Auto 4 was coming out. Now, Grand Theft Auto is a massive franchise. And this game was coming out. And I'll never forget, I asked you, if you get there, can you please get me this game? And you said, okay, cool. So you went there and you called me and you said, this game's not yours. I was like, that's cool. It's fine. Then I think it was a day before you were coming back. You called me and you said one of your friends was still there. And you spoke to your friend about it. And he found the game. Do I still want it? And I was like, yes. So it was like, cool, great. He's going to ship the game from Hong Kong to South Africa. And I'll never forget, like, day in, day out, week in, week out, asking, where's the game? Where's the game? Where's the game? And you got so upset with me because I was just such a nag because I so badly wanted this game. And it eventually came and I finished it in good old-fashioned me. I finished it, I think, in like 4 days or something because I had all the time in the world. But that, in such a long explanation and story, was one of my most memorable moments when it came to gaming with you, that you were so willing to fuel my gaming passion, but I annoyed you so much in the process. Has there ever been a gaming moment, or even if I can even say and branch it out to any moment, that has either made you laugh or want to kick my head off?
Both.
Oh, great. Sometimes
so what
at
you're
the
doing,
same time.
So what you're doing is my fault.
Yeah,
yes,
pretty much.
I remember
and
clearly.
it started with Nintendo.
It was.
It did, actually.
It was. And that Grand Theft Auto 4 that you're talking about was shipped to me by a guy by the name of PC Cheng.
I remember PC Cheng.
You went there with me.
He had that
small little shop called Funda Mervis.
And he was the one Chinese person that was obsessed with South Africans.
Yes.
Yeah, I remember that.
There were photographs in his little shop, probably the size of the kitchen, that had South African money pinned on it. Our business cards, myself, Spencer and Greg, our business cards were pinned onto his...
Didn't he also have a signed something from the Springboks?
Yeah. There was Springboks flags, South African flags, and all our electronics we used to get from PC Cheng. We would phone him in advance and he would pre-order and have the stuff ready when we got there.
I remember that.
Our bow systems we bought in...
I learned about bows because of PC Cheng, actually.
Yeah. You were in PC Cheng.
And we were in...
And it was traditional. Regardless of the time you walked in there, he gave you a line lager. You had to drink beer. You had this little bar fridge in his shop. And if you went there at 10 o'clock in the morning, you were given a beer. If you went there at 10 o'clock tonight, you were given a beer. And you had to drink.
Right now, that sounds like my kind of place to be.
I'm sure.
I could do with a beer. But when we were in Hong Kong, speaking of drinking, we went to a Russian bar.
Oh,
do you
that's
remember?
right.
Do you remember that? I think it was called Balalaika. And we learned Nazdorvi and all of that, and we drank all these like little shooters. Mind you...
They weren't shooters. They were actually... they were shooters. It was flavored vodka.
True.
In a deep freeze.
So I was about to say, it was in a deep freeze.
Yeah.
That was probably all of 2 meters by 2 meters. It was literally a fridge.
Yeah.
But it had all these...
flavored
vodka bottles like frosted, frozen to the wall.
Correct.
And they pull one off and then they give you... and you drink vodka to keep warm.
Yeah.
But however, not the best parenting advice now in hindsight. But how old was I in that room?
I don't remember.
Let me recall
but
your
you
memory.
Had a vodka.
I was 16 years old. But obviously when you're 16, I mean, everyone's drinking at 16. I mean, I threw up in the back of your car when I was 16.
And cleaned it afterwards.
Yeah, that was funny. How did that come about again?
I took you to a party. I had to fetch you that night. When I got there, you were out of your bracket.
I still remember you called me.
I was not going to let you sit in the front of my car, so you sat in the back because you were out of your bracket, and you started getting sick. You opened the door, you nearly fell out, puked in my car, so I drove at midnight straight to a service station to have my car washed. And the service station was open. They opened the car wash, and you had to wash the car and clean it. And then took you home for a nice cold shower so you could sober up.
I still remember that cold shower.
Good. Are you drinking these days?
Yeah. Well, keep in mind, I didn't drink for a while. For like a solid while, I didn't drink. I didn't drink for like 6-7 years, actually. I didn't touch it. And then the one day I was like, I feel like a glass of wine. And then I started getting into my wines. But that's another topic for another day. But yeah, I've had a few fair share questionable life choices as a teenager. I still remember the next day I did athletics. I don't know if you remember. True. I woke up with the most hangover the hangover from the mothership, and I had to do it. I think it was a 200 or 100 meter sprint, and you were like, "You going? It's done."
You didn't want to go.
I didn't because I felt horrible.
And you were going to run. You want to drink? You're going to run.
And I'll never forget.
And I said, and you better win. And you did.
And I did win. I came first, which was funny because shows what you can do with a bit of vodka in your blood.
So that brings me to the point that winning is not everything. It's the only thing.
Very true.
And make sure that you win.
That's actually been a very key, I would almost say, mindset that you've raised all your kids on, is winning. And not winning in the sense to like, hey, look at me, but winning to, what do you have to do? Oh, do you have to do that? Cool, that's what you do. Like, there's no second place if winning is the goal. If that's the goal, then that's what you got to do. And to kind of couple that, I remember growing up, you always used to say to me, and it's not really attached to like running a race and winning, but it's more the mindset of it. But if you are going to get into a fight, which I've had many of those growing up in school, but if you're going to get into a fight, never be the first one to throw the punch, but always be the last one. And then another thing you always used to say is never start the fight, but always finish it.
Never start the fight, but finish it, and make sure you finish it standing.
Very true. And I think, that's always helped me in life, even to this day, because when I go through hard times and I go through difficult moments and I go through a few pivotal points where I feel like tapping out, or I feel like throwing in the towel, or I feel like, whatever reference I can use.
It's not an option.
It's not, you just keep going. And much like what we said, you keep turning the page in this book, and before you know it, the fight will be done. The bell will ring.
And make sure you're
standing. Because there's going to be another fight. And I think that's the cool thing now where I'm at, is I know there's going to be more fights. But I know I can keep standing. And I think that...
there are a good couple of rounds in any fight.
Yeah?
You might lose a few rounds, but make sure you finish that fight standing.
So now, I guess maybe to close, that fight to finish, because I'm going to kind of speak in Koja, but I'll kind of land it. But in life, there's fights, not only just physical fights.
Life's a fight.
Life's a fight. That sounds like it should be on a T-shirt or a tattoo. Come, let's go get matching tattoos. But life is a fight, and in life there are fights. And in what I do, and specifically this quote-unquote Canton Parker podcast, because he calls a podcast after themselves, me apparently, but I do feel like there'll be key conversations in this podcast, and to kick this podcast off with the episodes that are coming and the seasons that are coming and the people that are going to watch this, both that will be educated, entertained, or inspired through those 3 E's that are kind of base all my content framework around. There will be a few fights that people disagree, that people push back on, that people get a bit loud with noise, and even to the degree of getting cancelled. As a father to a son, from a fatherly advice, or coming from a father saying there's going to be a fight, what would you kind of give me that fatherly talk on?
Regardless, make sure you finish being fully you.
And still standing.
And standing.
And how would it, like in your opinion, listening to the noise, and I'm gonna call it noise, the noise of the world, not the voice, the noise of the world, when they try to tell you what to do, how to think, how to be, how to feel, but you're still standing strong to who you are, what you do, what you believe in, knowing the bullseye on the target, and turning the pages to get to that. What would be that?
Take that noise and turn it into the music you like listening to.
Because music's a beautiful thing.
I think.
You think?
I think.
Well, I guess on that, I'm gonna just say thank you for joining the official start of the Canton Parker podcast.
And I will finish by saying, be fully you and stand no matter what.
Love it.
For what you believe in.
Well, you never know. How quick will it take to get me cancelled?
What's cancelled? That word doesn't exist.
I love it. Well, Dad, thank you. I love you.
Pleasure, my boy. I love you too.
And thanks for always being my champion.
Many more of what this venture that you're embarking on.
Might be fun or the worst thing ever.
Depends what you make of it.
Love
Good
it.
boy.